Is Plucky Squire as good as it looks, and where did it come from? I'll tell you what, it came from every single one of us who loves games, where we dive into the memories and nostalgia of being a kid and thinking your toys, drawings, or cutouts could have come to life on their own. And sometimes we don't know we wanted something until we got it, and other times we don't ever know why we get something. Just look at the Pharrell Williams Lego movie. But I can tell you I'm always looking towards games that investigate toy worlds or diving into titles and ideas of a child's imagination, from Toy Commander to Lego, Toy Story to Hypercharged Unboxed. But Plucky Squire does it different. Is that enough? Well, that's what this review is going to explain. I just passed my 10th year of no sponsored reviews here on YouTube. If this game isn't up your alley, check out Black Myth, Warhammer, as well as Frostpunk 2 or Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster, and those reviews that should be on the channel. If you like this stuff, maybe subscribe. Plucky Squire is about Jot, the main hero, in a series of books and cartoons from an all-powerful creator. Jot's content to live inside those books and stories and drawings because, frankly, he always wins, because a hero who loses all the time is just a loser. In these waged wars, Jot's consistent enemy is Humgrump, the consistent loser to Jot's winner. Now, he's a pretty crackin' villain, a bad guy stuck within a game like Benedict in Last Action Hero, who realizes he's stuck in this never-ending story, but has figured out a way out of it. And somehow, he's found a power that he plans to use. He can make effects outside of the cartoon and game world and into the real one. So it's up to Jot and his friends to figure out how to save their books and their lives, and all of those who live in the creator's books. But here's an even more important goal. He has to make sure that the all-powerful creator can continue to create, because the seer in their world has seen the future, and if Jot and friends don't succeed, his stories and series of books inspiring other creators around the world will never be done. Plucky Squire is set to release on multiple platforms, including PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo Switch, and PC on the 17th, for anywhere from $37 to $40. Games that present the miniature world of toys and creations always deliver it differently. And really, Plucky Squire is no different than that. What starts out as a 2D scroller, a mix of Zeldas from various time frames, sometimes viewed from the side on in platforming, other times from top down in RPG moments, all braced within the creator's book with hand-drawn art styles that then unfold into something completely different after Jot finds himself unchained by the 2D plane and leaping out into the real world. And this is straight up where the juice happens. The game's presentation is fascinating. It's a game where new discoveries are wrapped within a title that looks like it's being lodged in memories and nostalgia. And those two may seem at odds, but they just seem that way. The hand-drawn merges almost seamlessly with the 3D, from exploration to true discovery, puzzle working to boss battles. You know that Plucky Squire is going to surprise you and is aiming to consistently surprise when suddenly it becomes Mike Tyson's Punch-Out to take a boss down, and you realize this is exactly what I wanted without knowing it. Plucky's art style is also very well done. Firstly, the 2D art. It looks older at first blush, but it has a fine-tuned current day look to it, and something you may have seen as a kid, whether it be drawings or sticker books. Then, just when you get used to it, you leap into the 3D sections that look fairly outstanding. It reminds me of TV shows that do an animation or cartoon episode. And seeing Jot sneak around or watch out for enemies on the game table, or toss a dice to knock down some dominoes, then leap into a portal and see both himself and that dice transform into 2D representations is just a great way to deliver this kind of look. For example, there was a moment when I needed a key to get into a door in the 3D part of the world, which resulted in a battle with spiders on the 2D plane on a piece of paper that was plastered on the side of the castle wall. To unlock a door on another rampart and bounce in between the two dimensions felt like a double jump on any other game. And it's that way that the game just continues to merge this facade of both spatial places, consistently going and overlapping from the crushed board sides of a castle wall to paints and thinners used by creators, and where you go around them and they all have health warnings and usage instructions all over them. There's something to be said about attention to detail for no reason, and really attention to detail that's reasonable. And here the developers have expertly drawn the line between the two. Every single thing that you find or see or interact with feels like it really would be there on somebody's hobby table. Were you a kid with a fertile imagination? I was. Let me explain. I've been painting and a hobbyist in miniatures and D&D since I was 7, bought my first rack of paints at 9, and constructed my first, unfortunately, highly flammable castle at 11. Sorry, Castle Dread, you will be missed. But I also thought my toys were alive. I ran out into the rain one night to save 4 brave G.I. Joes I'd buried up to their necks in the dirt the night before. Now, ignoring my torture turned to love inner turmoil. A game aiming for that feeling of the dual universe is what I was expecting and what I got. And seeing the knickknacks all over many of these locations are set out everywhere and makes the game feel like home and give me a bit of nostalgia before the storybook format that the game so eloquently delivers nailed the rest of it. For example, you have a Magic the Gathering knockoff card and an elf you need a bow from who talks to you not in the moving block-like paper text script that everybody else does in the game, but in writing on her card like an ability being read to a player. At first, the game presents a colorful art book style from decades ago when books would just be bought and they had nothing but black colored pages, and with some crayons, some scissors, and that edible paste kids always loved it down by the bucket, you could do some wild adventures. I mean, they've even got the sheen of the paper right. For example, in the cave entrances, the black of the page has a shine to it that's just exactly like a light hitting an angle on the page. Then the game goes fully 3D, mixing in the 2D styles like animated drawings with 3D environments. But even then, they turn that on its side. For example, some characters talk to you via living post-it notes like old school cartoons or Clippy from Microsoft coming alive. And the greatest part about Squire is as it continues to build, it continues to merge those two different worlds. They are not consistently separate. When it comes to performance, listen, this game isn't requiring almost anything. It can run on super low level cards, even during the 3D moments. And other than a stutter that sometimes came up with loading into new chapters, it was a locked frame rate throughout with all settings on the highest. It really didn't matter which card I threw at this thing. This isn't a game pushing anything other than the artistic design and chops that the company artists had utmost in their minds. In many ways, it reminds me of Astrobot, not in the sheer technical prowess, but in a game that even at lower resolution still looks phenomenal as it's based on the core concepts, and they're so rock solid and well thought out that even the smallest surprise causes you to sit back and go, yep, I get it. What the game doesn't deliver in absolute graphical bliss and glitz, it delivers in ideas. When it comes to ideas, sound, music, and voice matter big time, especially in a game like this. First, let's talk about the sound. It's got the beeps and boops of older style games, but it also has a refreshing amount of processing on exploration, especially in the third-person world. For example, the first time you go out onto this big craft table in the real world, everything begins to sound huge, lofty, airy, and wide. When you leap into the 2D sections, it's all very reminiscent of 2D adventure games from the past. I admit there were times where I wish there was a little bit more audio going on in any particular area, and maybe some of the hit sounds were a little bit cleaned up, but I still really enjoyed it. I also enjoyed the voice. Now, first, the narrator is amazing. He gives these updates on the heroes as they move between chapters or meet new enemies, while for the most part, everyone else is silent, speaking again in nothing more than text blurbs that pop up as you work your way through the main storyline. But it's great stuff, and while not outstanding, it does feel like a dad reading to his child, and then the rest of the adventure, even the other characters talking, is just within the imagination, whoever's experiencing it, which is the player. And the player's also going to experience that music, and obviously music is subjective. It always swings between what fits the game and what the artist is trying to accomplish, which is either augmentation of what's on screen or transformative compared to what's displayed. Here, I was honestly less taken by it. There's a number of tracks that didn't really seem to fit at all, and overall many of them appear like they're from different games or different elements. A lot of them are trying to hit the flavor of a mini game or a particular moment. They're not really timed exactly right, even taking into account that mini game format you have, and I was puzzled by why it was chosen. But it's not that they are all bad, because there are things like a hard rock mountain troll showing up and introduced with a rock guitar like Stinger that is awesome. It's just more eclectic than I think I ever expected. Now, speaking of eclectic, that's going to be about the gameplay, because this game does a lot. There are a few games that surprise me, because I'm not immune to it, but most of the titles I play, and I think a lot of us play, have a similar feel or can be locked into a genre or a combined genre easy enough, even if they're excellent. But if there was a game that came close, a game that edged towards that feeling of not at all knowing what to expect moment to moment, it would be Plucky Squire. Wherever there's a portal around, Jock can jump out of the storybook pages and into the real world, interacting with objects like mugs and toys and walls in a 3D space, adding depth and variety to gameplay. He can jump in on one side and enter the other side of the page to get past an obstruction and figure his way through a puzzle. Now, when it comes to the puzzles, some are ingenious and gameplay elements that I think go hand in hand with the presentation. For example, the word puzzles around the game, and while none of them are too hard, they can involve changing the word in a sentence that's written on the page to change the level. For example, in one room you find scattered books, and in a passageway they're stacked, and the writing on the page states these pages in this room are stacked up. So you grab the word scattered from one room and you take it to the other, you take it to the gate, you drop it in front of the gate, it changes the sentence to say these books that originally said were stacked are now scattered, and they scatter around you. But if you put the wrong word into the wrong place, it doesn't always result in nothing happening. Sometimes it can adjust the creature in front of you or create some weird obstacle. It's masterful, and it causes you to experiment for no real good reason. You can just do it. And again, many of those words can be crossed and used across different pages in the same chapter. So you might find yourself jumping out of a portal, moving the book, going to a different page, grabbing a word from an adventure moment that you had prior, and then going back to the new location. When it comes to combat, which is separate from the puzzling completely, it's fairly basic, though you can get upgrades for the ability to do more damage. You have 360 spins as well as throwing the sword. You can also get a temporary weapon or two from specific characters in sections of the game that include mini-games. Most of the attacks and rolling with the enemies is both replicated in 3D and 2D space, mimicking their attacks regardless of where they are, which is awesome to see, and it makes everything feel very combined. Most fighting and battles are lean affairs, though, with the enemies having a couple different attacks like spitting as their go-to or up-close attacks. Nothing too hard here, and pretty much anybody who has played any of these kind of games is not going to have an issue. I will say it ramps up, not significantly, but noticeably in the later sections when entering some of those spots. It's still pretty lean. That doesn't mean it's not fun, it's just that it's more of a platformer with some action than an action platformer. The levels themselves keep moving as you leap in and out of those 3D and 2D worlds, sometimes carrying items between pages, or tilting the entire book and sliding items from one side to the second, and other optional ways you can work within it. Each chapter is a new location or a new space to explore, and tropes we see in many games or in D&D sessions or in movies, and their locations like swamps, temples, and mountains are all replicated here. Somehow Plucky Squire doesn't overstay its welcome though, and I want to say how much I appreciate that. There are times when you're thinking, okay, so this part's going to continue here? Will I see this kind of minigame again? But then just boom, another chapter, another time where Jot, like a master storyteller, turns the next page and the narrator pipes up and gives us just a short explanation in the gameplay with a narrative turn like a storyteller on an uncomfortable log in the woods around a campfire, shifting in place and starting over or in a different section. Here the storyteller can occasionally go back and change the world prior though, and that's one of the great ways here. And it never really results in something like a dad telling a joke and halfway through he says, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you something at the starting that's super important. Most of it all fits in. Here, with the twisting and turning of the pages and with the ability of Jot to go back into the previous parts of the same chapter and smash those words off the pages and carry them around, a giant toad turns into a tiny one, a gate opens, or a trench floods with water, which you just recently traipsed through dry as a bone. And in a way, Jot becomes a spellcaster, where he can change everything with just a single word inflection, turning a fireball into a firewall, then a campfire, then reversing it into an ice spear. By the way, you can't do those exact things. Those are just examples of how this would work. However, this presentation does come at a cost, and that's normal difficulty. The game is really not hard. In fact, it is a breeze, and that makes it feel like it's aimed at a younger segment than its fiction presents. Now, bear with me on this one. The game plays far closer to a super young adult's game, which means many kids may wonder where the cell phones are, or the microtransactions, or the Twitter or WhatsApp bad guys. It can feel disjointed in a way because it actually feels like this should be something from almost 2 or 3 decades ago. And I could actually see some kids, some younger people playing this and not understanding some of the jokes, or just maybe not jokes, but the inlines that they've got. It can just feel a little bit disjointed. Also, the game can be really finicky with control. Luckily, it's almost never at life or death moments, but sometimes trying to get a word to shift into a sentence, you end up tossing the damn thing around, or a place that looks passable isn't, and you find yourself trying to figure out what exactly you need to do to place a simple item. Also, getting into and out of portals is not a one-button affair, it's a hold, which really feels like it's a missed opportunity, because there are other times where there's automatic portal translation, where you pop into the portal in one place and you pop out instantly somewhere else. And unfortunately, you can't replicate that unless it's very specifically set up that way. And I actually feel that would have been awesome if it was instant. Also, while the consistent text pop-ups and text being delivered the way it is fine, and I get that there's no voice, it makes total sense, there's a hell of a lot of them. And when one sentence pop-ups continue throughout 5 or 6 hours, it can be a little bit trying on the eyes, especially with some of the color coordination that they've got on here. When it comes to fun factor, though, did that affect it? And sometimes surprise comes in many weird ways, a thought or an action. It's like remembering that if you ever gave blood, your blood's probably in somebody else's penis right now. And those expectations get through even though you knew, and you're like, wow, that's actually surprising. I hadn't thought about that, or I didn't expect this particular situation. I thought I knew what Plucky Squire was, yet its consistent change-ups and the delivery of the world changes you can make as this small character that can control the book physically, like I said, rocking the pages and moving things around the real world, but then finding out even more about why all this matters, this larger than your own life's goals, kept me inspired. And that's where the fun factor hit, because no matter what I just covered, there is a surprise within a surprise almost all the time. Some aren't the best or the biggest, but they're always coming. In games like this, and indeed in, let's say, Astrobot, in the same style, the consistently changing, ever-adapting gameplay can be its own real villain, the feeling of it wearing thin. Everything is awesome until it's too much of the same thing. Totally expected stuff. Here, it doesn't happen. It's playing with your toys. It's doing modeling without the razor cuts in 8 hours of time. It's the most heartfelt adventuring in a child's mindset you could have, and it's really peak, top tier in that particular genre. To me, an absolute blast. So as you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for a sale, deep sale kind of rating system. As Plucky Squire is on many systems and on PlayStation subscription day one, I'll give this sort of a 2 rating. First, buy or get it on sub ASAP. I think it's very worth it. If anything I've said speaks to you, you can do much worse than having 7 to 8 hours of unique exploration. Some will get through it more quickly, especially if they figure out the puzzles faster, which aren't difficult, as I said, or they decide to not experiment with sections and the word spells, which I also understand. But few games consistently surprise and delight the way this one did. A true pleasure to play. A great title to add to a growing stable of really amazing 2024 fall games, and something that is just different enough to keep me interested all the way through it. That's it for me. Like I said, no sponsored reviews, not 2 minutes long. Check out the podcast on the new channel, The Patron. Peace out and enjoy the rest of your week.
Once upon a time, there was a plucky squire named Jot.